everybody. Welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I'm here with I think it's his
First
first
time
time as a
host.
guest,
Yeah, first time
Donald.
host.
First time host and guest. Never, not affiliated yet, but Donald reached out and had a couple of things on his mind that he wanted to talk about. And I think we might also have James Pogue joining us at some point, but we'll just leave the suspense as to whether or not that will happen. Donald, why don't you just say what's on your mind? Let the spirit move you.
Well, when James gets here, we're probably just going to talk about Ohio for an hour.
So we better get the more other interesting topics
Yeah,
in.
well, just on the Ohio note, I've been reading um, essays by Bill Kaufman all year because he writes these like 2 or 3
Yep.
page essays, and they're a lot of fun. And the one I just read this morning, it's about Leslie Peltier, the great amateur astronomer of Ohio, who got really into stargazing as a young man on his parents'
Okay.
farm, and got a little uh, he got set up a little stargazing spot in the cow pasture, and would look at the stars and make notes. He actually discovered something like 15 comets, and would correspond with different astronomers of his time, and they would as an adult he became a famous in the world of astronomy amateur astronomer, and people would from Harvard and Princeton would come travel to see him in his little home in northwest Ohio.
What around what years
It'd be like
was this?
the 1930s, 1940s, like
Okay.
pre-war. uh and I don't know, I think he lived into the 70s maybe. um
Nice.
And he wrote a couple books he wrote an autobiography, which I'm really excited to read now. And he also wrote a book just about the ecology of the farm where he lived, but it's impossible to find copies of it. So now I'm going to try to track down.
Oh, that's so great.
So he's sort of
I
like
love
a
it. A
Thoreau.
doomer optimist out of time.
Absolutely. Yeah, he set up an actual observatory in his backyard to look at the heavens, and then would invite local school kids and so on to come. And
I
then he
love
and his
it.
wife would
I
just look
love
at the
it.
stars all the time. Uh,
Well, you're gonna have to recount this again once
but
James
anyway,
gets here,
Leslie
and then you
Peltier.
guys
So
can just go
that's our Ohio.
into Ohio
Yeah, there's
esoterica.
our Ohio note to begin, and it's just another reminder that he dropped out of high school to work on the family farm, and then just loved astronomy, and so he read books about it and looked at the night sky. So you don't need, just another reminder, you don't need to go to school or get a certificate or get anyone's permission um, to start doing something. You can just do it.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if this necessarily dovetails into the first topic we were going to talk about, which is environmentalism. But there's a lesson there, and I'm currently in this conference, which have to attend for my day job, and it is a sustainability conference, and it is all technocrats, and it's just driving me crazy that this is kind of like what this field has become, and nobody's really talking about how messed up that is. So like the credentialism, the technocrats. Is this what you wanted to talk about with environmentalism, or is
Not
it something
really,
broader?
but well, a little bit. I think that environmentalism, I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, and I realize that there are people.
Hey, we're talking about environmentalism, James. Go ahead,
Oh,
Donald.
I've never heard of that.
James, you missed my good Ohio
Go
stuff
ahead.
to start off. I was talking about Ohio.
I'm
Do you know
sorry.
Leslie Peltier?
How are you? Ah, uh, I do not.
He's Ohio's great amateur
Sorry, I'm getting like
astronomer.
60 calls.
He's Ohio's great amateur astronomer of the 20th century. So
I've not heard of it.
anyway, he discovered a lot of comets, but he is a high school dropout from Delphos, Ohio, who just built an observatory in the in his farm, on his farm, like on a cow field. Uh, anyway, that's what we started off. So you missed the good stuff, but environmentalism, you
Sorry.
two are closer to this than I am. So this is just my impression from afar, and I'm painting with a broad brush. I realize I will that there are people who don't for whom this is not true, but I think environmentalism from my perspective is almost exactly wrong. It's not only almost exactly wrong, it's also, I think at this point, profoundly evil. So there are a lot of young people now who are interested in ecological issues who go to therapy because they're so um, despondent and hopeless. Have you two encountered this phenomena?
I've encountered anecdotes of it. I've never seen it in the flesh.
I've seen that. I mean, I've seen it with the students that we have come to Uruguay who are kind of like, there's an urgency. And then they're like, almost like there's a terror that they experience about the urgency. And then there's an anxiety about it. And then, of course, one of the big critiques I've always had is that like the scope of the environmental problems feels so insurmountable. And then that really freaks young people out where they're just like, there's
Okay.
nothing to be done, and or the only thing that we can do is like the most
So this
radical
is a
thing.
real
That doesn't freak you out?
so anyway, this is a real thing. And I think beyond even young people who are environmental activists, I mean, some of these phrases have just like the world is on fire, I think is a phrase that gets tossed around. Like, oh, I can't do XYZ because the world is on fire. I assume that's a reference to climate change. And the idea of it seems to be that humans are the cause of the problem, um, and that humans have irreparably damaged the earth, and they have caused climate change, and climate change is going to make the earth uninhabitable for humans within some time frame. There was the fella who you and I talked to, Ashley, on here another time when I was a first time host, and he was telling me that
We lost
it
him.
was going to be impossible for me to swim in
So
the
how are you,
ocean
James?
I'm good.
in
I'm just gonna
Northwest
speak to.
Washington because the ocean
I'm
was
gonna
going to be
counter Don's
so hot
points while he's
Okay.
gone.
that I don't know,
Okay.
I
He
wasn't
can't
going to be
defend
able
himself.
to,
Um,
it was going to be
yeah, I mean, I'm coming into this late,
uninhabitable,
so I'm just
and that
surmising
there's
where he's
nothing we
going
can
with this.
do
And
other than negative, like
I mean,
that
from my
what
perspective, like as he was listing off those things, like
the
I
environment
don't
needs is for
disagree with any
humans
of
just
those
to
4
stop
points.
or
Like, and I
disappear.
Right.
don't. I maybe have nuanced views on them. I think maybe in these circles, like often people do have nuanced views on them. But like, I've been wrestling with this a lot recently because I think maybe from my perspective, we've jumped in this conversation about environmentalism from like the stuff where it has been very culturally alienating to a lot of people and therefore not a very effective political project. And then decided like that mode of understanding the world is not a good one, right? And like I'm actually very resistant to that. I think as a practical matter, the phrase environmentalism might not be a very effective one going forward.
Right.
And that's partly because it's been like tarred by both like it's been tarred by like abundance libs and by conservatives as just like politically toxic in a way that it's just like not that effective a way to organize politics anymore. And that's unfortunate. On the other hand, I think we have to remember that like it became toxic for a reason. And like the abundance libs don't like it because it like stops them from doing stuff they want to do. Like there's a reason that they care about that frame of understanding, you know, and I think that's
Abundance libs and abundance
yeah,
conservatives,
exactly. And I think
which is
that
a phrase you just coined.
Don, I was just vehemently disagreeing with you
Okay, good.
while you were gone and couldn't defend yourself. Uh but the thing that I was saying is that like I think I know where you're going with this, and I just I find this actually kind of a dangerous thing where like I completely agree with you that environmentalism as a political project is like not probably a functional one at this time, but like it does. You were bringing up oh my God, what's his name? Uh the climate scientist we like.
Elon.
Yeah. Um Elon Kelman. And it's like when you talk to Elon Kelman, like I I think he would take all four of those points that you just raised and say, well, each of those is 60% true and 40% like hyperbole and kind of coloring things into stark terms. And I think that, like, broadly speaking, on all those 4 points, he's right
Hear
about
me out,
that.
okay?
Like,
Let me finish. I'm not sure.
I don't, yeah,
So it, I don't actually think that people are wrong that there are all kinds of ecological problems. I don't think that's wrong at all. But what I think is absolutely wrong is the idea that humans are a purely negative force. And this is the frame that what needs to happen is humans withdrawing from the environment and letting nature take its course, and that this is the solution to ecological problems. Because if you really take that mindset, then the only thing you can do ultimately is die. Like that is ultimately the best thing that can happen for the environment is for there to be fewer humans, which of course that scientist, he was wishy-washy about it, but basically that's what he said, that he wanted, he had, he put it in some nice way. We need to do, you know, population control, but in a nice, in a nice
Yeah, we
consensual
were going
way. I
in that
mean,
direction towards
like
the
I've
end of
seen
your
famous
conversation, and then we
environmentalists,
cut it off.
like celebrate
Yeah.
the one child policy. Um, in China, with these, so there's always this, like, yes, this nice happy population control, but then I think underlying that there's a less happy reality to it. But I think, if I could,
well,
that the reality is that we need way more human intervention in the environment, but better. So we need lots and lots of human intervention in the environment, but the right intervention. And that rather than orienting people to despair and inaction, which in reality just means more or less like watch, stream another movie, order more stuff. It's like it becomes like functionally just a way of just keep going. Or I guess the other thing is like buy electric cars. Um, uh, it should be we should be orienting ourselves towards intervening in the environment in a much more direct, more people in a much more direct way, but in a more interesting way. Um, I still don't understand climate change at all, but if it is the case that the Pacific Northwest will return to what it once was, which was tropical, we know that from the fossil record. I don't know. Is that actually going to happen? Won't there be more biomass at that point? More, like all sorts of possibilities for growing stuff. Uh, I don't know. But that we should be that should be the orientation towards understanding humans as a keystone species that can do good things. Um, and uh, like in where I live, there should just be lots and lots of controlled burns in the forest. There needs to be, because
yeah,
of how what they look like, and I think people agree to that in theory. I talk to people who work on forest management here, but then no one does it. But even more than controlled burns, just for forest fire management, or chopping down big trees instead of just letting them die. That's the other thing. We have all these protected old growth things where the trees are in terrible shape, and then they just they're just allowed to die and fall over, and we never harvest them. Uh,
An old growth tree in a functioning old growth ecosystem virtually never, like, they die of old age
you should
very
come see
rarely,
some
and
of these
like
spots. They
they
look
if they
terrible
get
because we're just letting nature go take its course or whatever.
yeah, but that's I mean logging that, I mean the whole point, the way that the whole system works, right, is that like because nutrient cycling in the Northwest shuts down in the summer, it actually functions very slowly because you have summer drought. And so you have these like nutrient stores of the rare trees that die periodically. And you kind of need those for snags and to slowly leach nutrients back into the soil. Like, I don't think we have a big problem of like old growth trees dying in place and not being harvested. Like
But
that.
what do you think,
Oh,
James, of the bigger like
well,
contention
that's
that
my point is like, okay, so in so much as I get that people want to, I get that people bring, you know, increasingly like a very Christian perspective to this stuff. And, you know, it's the garden and humanity is not just a species. It's like we are the cultivator and we were chosen by God to do this. Fine. All right, whatever. But a garden that has too much of one species is not a functioning garden. And like, I mean, I don't know how I feel about population control, but what are we talking about? Are we talking about 1 billion Americans and like there's somehow going to be a functioning environment on this continent with 1 billion Americans? It's just not feasible. Like, and so the part where I get like, yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate and I have been for a long time on this podcast of like, let's do more controlled burns and like we need more human intervention in the forests. And as you say, Don, like even before white Europeans came to colonize this land, uh, there were a lot more controlled burns, and there was more wildlife because of that, because they cultivated, you know, meadows and lowland swamps and stuff like that. But it's also the case that like when you build a road through a wilderness area, like biodiversity decreases within 100 miles of that road, like overnight. And, you know, like if you wanted to do just on a simple matter of like energy math, if you wanted to do like 450 Americans living as we do now, but powered by something other than like the stuff we power now, like just you just wanted to do it, right? Either you're gonna whiz bang mini nukes everywhere around and like that's all gonna be perfect and like maybe that works. But like just on the scale of building solar panels, the actual when you build solar panels on those land areas, it's functionally a dead zone. This isn't like I mean, this is part of the problem with environmentalism. I'm kind of agreeing with you, but like this kind of idea that you can like technologically tinker your way to 600 million people in North America and like that you're still going to have like functioning elk populations when to do that you do have to develop. People want to move out, people want that space, people want to be able to drive to somewhere, and every time you pave that thing, every time you put a solar panel there, like that's 5 acres of like suddenly there's no insects there. Suddenly there's no like web of mycorrhizae and nematodes and like worm populations moving around. Suddenly you start cutting that stuff off, and that has a cumulative effect that we are living through now, where like the entire functioning of the system is like down to the point where like there really isn't any wild ecosystem left in America. There's still like stuff that works in the sense that like our bug populations still like hang on by a thread and like there's still like an ecosystem underlying the places where we live and whatnot. But like as in terms of like wild animals and that kind of like cultivate the garden so the creatures of the earth can live here and stuff, like that is gone. We just put every species larger than a mouse in America, we just manage as a kind of like big zoo creature that we like let to live and keep in a stasis of like very, very low populations.
Hmm.
And so like this whole thing of like, oh, if we just kind of like intervened more and like we can keep growing, like our way of life, like it really doesn't need to be impeded by this
No,
stuff.
it does need to be impeded. It
That's
does.
fine.
I, I,
What's that?
so
Yeah, I mean, I know you're not saying that, but this is where this conversation goes off, and that's why I'm speaking to it, because it's like it's just not true. And I feel like a lot of people, even in the sort of like heterodoxy, ecologically minded spaces, whatever you want to call it, have this idea that like, oh, environmentalism sucks. So like what we got to do is like grow, 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 but we love nature too. Like it all works. And it unfortunately it doesn't. Like, and I don't have a good prescription for that, but it just doesn't. The math doesn't work. We are a growing people still on a limited continent. Like at a certain point, things don't work. And like this is the thing. You look at native populations and like they didn't all grow because somebody put a tomahawk through their son's head. They didn't grow because they actually had natural birth control mechanisms where they were like, at a certain point, like our way of life doesn't really add up on this landscape. And you start to see that, like they don't really grow past a certain point. And my thing about like birth rates and populations and things like that is that there is to some degree a kind of American desire for space, at least shared by some people, an American desire for like room to roam and all that good old American stuff. And that like at a certain density, like you're going to have population control whether or not you like it. Because people are just not going to have kids. People are just not going to enjoy their life. People are not going to
oh, don't
like
worry, that's already happening.
that thing, that vitality that courses through you that causes you to want to have kids and grow and do all that stuff. It's just not there. And I think that's what we're experiencing. You're going to have population
People
control
are
whether or
already
not
not
you like
enjoying
it,
their
is
lives and
my
not having
view.
kids. So we have that.
Yeah.
We have that under
Yeah.
control.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Can I just suggest a couple of things? One, I think there is a thing where there's like a political pendulum swinging where, and I've like almost experienced this myself as an individual, getting super disillusioned with like the technocrats and the climate change people who then like, throw soup at paintings and don't have any like real straightforward agenda. And then use the climate change as a cudgel to like control and surveil people. I hate all of that. So then I get mad at that whole group. But then I'm almost like sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is like a lot of these people are ecologists at heart, or at least got into it for a love of ecology. And I'm at this, James, I was telling Donald, I'm at this conference right now. It's a sustainability conference. It's like thousands of people. And I'm in this room with these like people who measure the climate. And there's a couple of guys there whose like life is focused not on necessarily like fear mongering about climate change, but how to use climate projections in the next 5-10 years to determine like how to protect infrastructure, how to change agriculture to adapt to it. Like, and I'm sitting there thinking like, these aren't my enemies. These are the people who are literally just scientists trying to help people adapt to micro climate changes. And I had this conversation like, how do you take some of those things that you're finding on what your projections are for the next 5 years or whatever, and talk to farmers and get them prepared so that they're not having like these extreme weather events that they're unprepared for or whatever. And the answer of the guy was, you need more nuanced information and data to get to that. So it's like the opposite of what I hate, which is like this aggregate data that doesn't really mean anything. That's just this fear mongering thing. So I guess like to me now I'm kind of in this more nuanced zone, this medium zone where like there is a political coalition here. We shouldn't throw out all these like scientists and technocrats necessarily, just as a reaction to some of the worst versions of environmentalism.
Can I say something here? Because I think I have an theory about like what went wrong here. And
Okay.
it goes back to like the first interaction I had with Dio, and actually the first conversation Don and I had, which is like like if someone is gonna say like environmentalism has become evil, like told the thing so the thing that becomes like really tough in here to talk about, right, is like I was talking to a rancher to bring something up, like coalitionally speaking, about something I'm working on about the plan to sell off public lands in the West, right? And so you have like this kind of guy, Mike Lee, who is, I hope no one listening to this is gonna like blow
Get
up my
mad.
piece here. But like, you know, Mike Lee is a LARPing guy who's pretending to be based Mike Lee when in fact he's like an old school sort of like AEI Cheneyite libertarian who wants to sell off public lands because he's partly because it's an obscure thing having to do with the Mormon church that I'm not going to go into, and partly because that's just like their doom seeking, like messed up ideology, and those people are sick in the head. Um, but like you see in response to that, a coalition of kind of like right wing conservative guys who want to be able to hunt elk and range cattle on that land, and the same technocrats and, you know, Yale forestry grads who move out west and love public lands. Like that's the base coalition resisting that kind of thing, right? And I think what has become in a global sense, like you can map this in like a big problem of how the economy worked in the United States of America over the course of the period under which we were a financial empire, which let's say started in 1971 and might be ending now, and it is exactly coterminous with the period under which like that sort of liberal environmentalism took root and had its kind of heyday, right? And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that over time, like the boomers engineered a structure under which elite right thinking people were increasingly funneled into non-real, financialized, high paying, upper echelon jobs. And the productive people working in the productive economy were increasingly effed over for lots of different reasons. And the people in the West and the people who sort of like actually live through the negative economic impacts of environmentalism are virtually all chuds just by nature of where they live and what they do. And so when you had the culture war, it was also a political economic class war against them. And it was really easy for everyone in the environmental groups to go, those guys are just the problem. Like, let's just
Right.
get rid of them. And so, point being, I was talking to this rancher and he was saying something, and I was like trying to stop him because I was like, you don't have to say this. You're talking to the New York Times. Like, don't go too hard. He was like, no, I will go hard. They waged a genocide against people like me, and they wanted to destroy people and get people like me out of this country and break us. Broadly speaking, I think that's true. Like, that's not true of everybody. It's not true of any individual Yale grad NGO type environmentalist that I personally know. But as a structure, that's how it came to work. And the toxicity of environmentalism became that it was so divorced from the real in virtually every sense, from the real functioning of like even like what an ecosystem is. So you're like, oh no, let's like fight forest fires. Like that was a big thing for highly trained environmental scientists.
Right.
Like after tall timbers had already sort of settled this question,
Yeah.
like after we already knew that we needed more fire on the landscape, not less, like there were just people who just like didn't really know stuff. Um, and like something we've talked about on this pod before, but like you have a gajillion people who came out west to do environmental work, but no functional work being done. Just like paper being pushed, money being raised, papers being written. Everybody
I
wants to
jump
be an
in,
environmental
James.
journalist. Nobody wants to like swing ahead.
So
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
think this same story can be told across lots of fields, um, like international development, uh, conflict management. Um, you know, where it's like the goal is to make sure every war lasts forever, but in a managed way. You know, and in every single case, the actual goal is jobs for people with graduate degrees. These are careers, you know. When uh, like when a conflict somewhere in the world ends, that's people's jobs are on the line, and making sure that conflict is managed in a humane, whatever way for, you know, and same, you know, homelessness, another like famous one. You know, it's a huge industry, lots and lots of money. Um, and on an individual, I think there are a lot of cynical actors, but a lot of non-cynical actors actually, like people who are like, that's what's interesting, like
Right.
that
Yeah, I just
their
want to
motivation, the
specify.
motivations for lots of individuals, at least it's or at least partially very good. Um, I think they still also, are motivated by money, but um, yeah.
Can I just specify here? Because I think part of what throws people off in these conversations is like what I hear you saying, and certainly what I'm saying is like the purpose of a system is what it does. And so like it's not my belief that there's like literally anyone, even at the top, whose like goal is jobs for grad students, but somehow like that's how the
Well,
system
there's
worked,
people whose
and
goal is
thus
to
did
get the
that
grant.
become the goal,
So
sort
on
of,
a day-to-day
Yeah.
level, there are lots of people whose goal is to get the next grant. I think that's fair. And what does the grant mean? It means jobs for people with graduate degrees. So I think it does become uh, there that I think it is that in a way. It's just one step removed. And it's all very bureaucratic. It's
I'm
very
just saying
bureaucratic. Uh,
I don't think there's like a
oh, sure.
conspiracy
There's not a room
where
where
like
five people are stroking their beards and say, "Yes, we have got 100 more jobs for University of Chicago."
There is a world in which somebody at NSF and all these different agencies did decide to allocate money this way over an incremental period where this what do you think?
I'm
You
gonna
don't think so,
defend the libs
James?
here. I'm gonna defend the libs here. That's ridiculous because like no, if you want it, like you have to look. I mean, you have to look at like the. I mean, you have to look at like the Fed here. Like you have to look at QE. Like there's like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to like blame this on environmentalists for like being downstream of a system that just basically pumped money into the East Coast.
I mean the
And like
feds. I mean them. They decided this is what we're going to do. We're going to have this
like
grant system. It's going to
no,
go to
no, no,
people
no.
who are not.
I mean, you have to look at like the financial superstructure of the United States. Like when we restructured the
That's true.
economy to be a rent-seeking thing that like basically was downstream of Citibank taking like a cut of capital flows to the rest of the world, like naturally, like that just became like, oh, well, then those guys like fund their daughter's friend
Yeah,
who like is
right.
at Columbia to do X. Like
But it goes
this
back
is
further,
natural. Like
I
if
would
you had
say, like even the idea which all of us are accustomed to of the federal government being a soup of three-letter agencies is a product of the New Deal and the Great Society. Like the bureaucratization of American life, you know, Woodrow Wilson, but really it's like New Deal and Great Society. Uh, and all of these things, like school is very like training for bureaucratic life. Grad school, especially the sorts of grad programs that we're talking about, these kind of like practical grad programs are training for bureaucratic life. And so much and a lot of corporate stuff honestly is also like very bureaucratic. And so and the kind of the fellow that you were talking to, James, is the rancher is like a corner of America that is to some degree at the mercy, to a large degree at the mercy of that bureaucracy, but is not part of it. And I think that the story of bureaucratization, um, uh, and how demoralizing it is, just on for people who aren't getting paid a lot from it, by it. But I think even the people who are really enmeshed in it, they move to big cities, they rent expensive apartments, they don't have children. I mean, it's clear that that life of being even succeeding in the bureaucratic world is also not um, like a life affirming and happy uh, for the most part. Um, but that bureaucratization of life is part of the story. So yes, my opening gambit of environmentalism is evil. It's really not just environmentalism. That's just one part of a bigger story of bureaucracy and financialization and turning away
yeah.
from reality. And so I'd like to introduce a new
Donald,
topic if
may
I
I,
could.
Wait, I want to say
I would,
something. I want to say something on that though, because I'm now like a pro New Deal. You're not in our signal chat, so you don't.
you need to
I've turned
join it,
into a
Donald.
pro New Deal lib, um, and
James just likes to be a contrarian, no matter what anyone in DO is thinking. We're the cutting edge, but he has to be the
forgive me
bleeding
for
edge,
being
so
an
he has to be a
independent
contrarian too.
thinker, a free thinker. I'm the internet. What is it? The
Yeah, what
internet
happened
dark
to
web.
that?
Um,
Intellectual
Yeah,
dark
for
web.
Yeah,
those
that's what
guys.
I'm about. I'm about just like thinking this with free thoughts, you know? Um, but uh what was I gonna say? Oh,
You're pro New Deal now. You're a
yeah, I
pro
mean,
New Deal lib.
okay, so look, yeah, all right. First of all, the New Deal was like the worst thing that ever happened in the American environment. Like, and I'm not aside from like runaway neoliberal development or whatever, the New Deal was like the worst project-based thing that ever happened to like
The
wild
highway
spaces in
system
America. Just like because of
and the
the way.
highway system.
What's that?
Highway system?
Well, good point. Okay, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. But on a project basis, like you can look at what the New Deal worked and it's just horrific. Um, and I totally acknowledge that. But like as a structure for how we are going to do things in the future, like I'm really, really skeptical of a lot of conversations happening both on the right and in like liberal spaces right now, where like environmentalism has been sort of reassociated with like, oh, bureaucracy is really bad and like the agencies are really bad. And like the problem is that for environmental stuff to work, like what we actually need are what the New Deal offered, which is like pretty regular people who like these early technocrats were like frequently pretty salt of the
They all went
earth,
to
or like
Harvard.
they're people like us
They
in
all
this
went to
conversation.
Harvard.
What's that? Yeah, but I mean, look, I'm big on this guy Leland Olds right now, who actually was very bad for the environment because he was like a big dam builder. But Olds was like one of these sort of go into the tenements, live amongst the coal miners, kind of like activists who really thought, and I love this. He really thought like America was going to face a revolution, and he was a kind of I forget what denomination, but kind of like liberal Protestant pastor who despaired because he was like what we need in this country is a new order on an American model. Like it's not going to work if it's not like life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom, like preserving that liberty. And he despaired of like finding a way between communism and the American way that would actually like break the huge extent of corporate power that had developed in the 1920s, the incredibly destructive version of development that our industrial period produced. And in the New Deal, he found actually a cadre of people who came up from these spaces where they actually like knew the American people and knew what it meant to build something on the American model. And they came in and they didn't say like, we're going to nationalize utilities. They said, we're going to say utility, don't do that. And the big example I have in my head right now is like, you could do that according to like what many people propose, like with Twitter or something, and just on an American model, say like, what we're going to do is regulate these spaces such that now, according to government regulation, it is illegal for you to shut someone down for speech. You can't do that. But you also can't prioritize someone else on the algo. And we're going to make this is how we're going to do it. And we're going to tone down this complete insanity that has been engineered by these algos
Mm.
without taking away your speech. And how are you going to do that without bureaucrats? Like, how are you going to do that without somebody to come in? How are you going to do that without the United States Forest Service? The best thing you want to get more people on the land, you should be paying boys who went to Michigan, just like they did when they started that thing. They're a little bit elite. They're going to be upper middle class. This is just how this works. And you're going to send them out and you're going to have them working like Gifford Pinchot did on the land. And they're going to love it. People fought each other for jobs. Like bankers and mining magnates, they like tried to bribe people to get their kids these jobs because people want that. And that was because you created an agency that people looked at that uniform and they went, that is public service. That is America. That is as cool. We're not at war right now, but we can do that. That is as close to war and honor as I can get my freaking, they were all boys, my white boy into
Problem is
doing,
that this
right?
was
You do that with the chuds,
this
that's going to
was
work.
uh there's lots of energy at the beginning, right? This isn't after almost a century of bureaucratic life. This is still getting to draw on all of the life force of pre-bureaucratic America and then funnel it into government projects. And then, but now we're, what, 90 years in to the experiment, and there's
Yeah.
not that one, there's not a huge reserve of young people as much anymore because bureaucratic life is
Employ the olds. They need exercise.
uh,
Wait, but I think that Donald's turning towards something a
so I'm sorry.
concept he's been wanting
I've
to
just brought
introduce,
you
which I
two
think is
together
perfect for
so
this
I
time.
can
But wait, I'll just
talk
say
at you. But all right, go ahead, Ashley.
wait, but I'll just say briefly, I think one of the things that we're thinking about on this podcast a lot is what are models from the past, but also what kind of solutions do you have like on the downswing of energy or I don't know, momentum and maybe you just disagree that we're on a downswing.
No, I'm just gonna the ups. Do you guys think that the upswing was like everyone in 1929 America, a place on the verge of communist revolution? Like, did everyone was like, oh yeah, like you know what we got to do? Like, or I mean, we were talking about the Forest Service before, but a place that is like, when in the time the Forest Service was founded, a place that is on the verge of civil war, where it's like politicians are being assassinated left
Yeah,
and
but that's
right.
there's all this energy at that
Yeah,
time, including
well,
actual
if you
fossil
judge
fuels.
energy by
And
political assassinations, then we've got a lot. Like,
yeah, I
no
guess.
one, no one is sitting here. No one is like sitting there thinking like, yeah, you know what? We're all really, really mad, but definitely, like for sure, like right around the corner, there's going to be a unifying project we're all going to get behind. No, TR comes in and
Yeah,
is like,
okay.
yo, let's go. And FDR, again, Leland Olds, he built the New Deal, like his corner of the New Deal, but the New Deal was built block by block. And I'm not saying let's go back to the New Deal order, an order that ended with Johnson. I'm saying that like the ethos and spirit and mindset that went into that New Deal, such that you could actually corral the forces in American life in a path that allows for American life to continue, is one that I think we are going to have to find, or we are going to hang apart. Like this is just, and
New
so
Deal was
my point is not like, let us look back at the New Deal and say, like, how do we make this regulatory order work again? My point is that we are going to have to build a new regulatory order. And, like, for better or for worse, I don't think the Forest Service is going to survive, for example. I think they're trying to kill it right now, and I think that's a bad idea. I think you should right now take the quote unquote brand that is the Forest Service and re-inject it with funds, ethos, a national backing, make it a national fire service, make it professionalized in the way that it used to be. I don't think they're going to do that. I think it, to a certain wing of America, the brand is too toxic now. Fine. Make that new fire service into something special. Fine. Like but you're still going to have to do that. Um, that's my only point.
Okay, Donald,
Yeah, well, just
introduce
briefly, I'd say
your
the New Deal
concept.
was a communist revolution. But in any case, um, you can go back and read like Robert Frost and Rose Wilder Lane. Like the opponents of the New Deal are
You have to join the
okay.
group
Well,
chat. We
whatever.
just had
And
these arguments. We've been having these
in any
arguments for
case,
weeks. Um,
you both know John Michael Greer. Okay, so John Michael Greer has this idea of catabolic collapse, and I'd like to introduce a wrinkle on it. What I've started calling intellectual catabolic collapse, which is I think happening now, whereby you create complex systems that replace thinking, um, such that you destroy the intellectual capacity to maintain or develop them. So, for example, if everyone uses the gizmos to write code for them, then nobody knows how to. You quickly, like no one knows how to write code anymore, and then no one knows how to actually maintain the gizmos. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that all this stuff, which I don't participate in personally, is going to destroy the intellectual capacity necessary to maintain it,
This is
and
a cause for optimism.
then we
Okay.
can move on to the glorious future, whatever it is, or not glorious. I don't know, but I'm optimistic about my own life. So uh, that on some basic level, so it used to be there's a dream. Wendell Berry writes a lot about this of life without labor. Um, and it's like the
Uh-huh.
old, like he draws it to Calhoun, like the famous defender of slavery. Um, had this idea there's all this labor that's not that it's beneath the dignity of white man to do manual labor. It's like this old idea, and then we expanded that uh, further and further out, so without a racial element to it anymore. Um, and even if obviously labor is necessary and continues, it gets more and more marginalized, or it gets done by foreign imports, like an imported serf class, um, so that people can pursue the great dream of no labor. But now we've expanded that so that we can have a
Even
life
to
without
intellectual
labor or
pursuits.
thinking. That now the dream is that you don't have to write or read either, and that even like the so-called like white collar knowledge workers, even they don't have to work uh, anymore either. And it's incredible because at that point, I don't know what you're left with. Leisure, I guess, is the or not even. I don't even know what the. I'm not told. I can't tell. I don't totally understand the telos of the project other than just death. Uh, But my glimmer of optimism is that we're going to introduce a sort of, maybe perhaps pretty quickly, this intellectual catabolic collapse where all of this stupid human destroying stuff will just not be able to function because we'll very quickly destroy the rather high level intellectual capacity necessary to maintain and expand it uh, through the stuff itself, or the even more far out, uh, if supposedly computers will get so fast, I don't know how all this stuff works, so that the encryption won't work anymore, because the computers will be able to defeat
That's
encryption, and then it becomes
that's interesting. Yeah.
like in the Dune novel, everyone has to use knives again, um, and it'll be great. Everything
Yeah.
will have to go back to like pencil and paper because the computers, nothing will be secure anymore. So you can't, do banking or, um, you know, everyone can read your email, that sort of thing. Uh, and so this is intellectual
Oh my God.
catabolic collapse. What do you guys think?
James?
Well, there's a lot there. I was gonna say that this points to my other theory that I'm working on right now, which is like sort of like something we've talked about before in the way that like Albion Seed still just explains everything about America and like whatever you think of like whether you're like one of these like Heritage America chuds, like get them all out, or like you're a like a well-thinking liberal, like there's a weird thing where everyone's just like continuously in this country living out tribal conflicts from 1758, and like it's just a world everyone has to live in. It's like actually sort of unfortunate. um but like in so much as you brought up John C. Calhoun, and it's funny because like my description of what is happening with Trump, like if you want to understand it on a deep level, is that it is a resurgence of Jacksonian America. And Jackson was the first Scots-Irish president. He was the culmination, you might say, of the Jeffersonian project, which was built on Jefferson's idea that there's a fundamental right to labor the earth and that people who labor the earth are above other people. And like Jackson, somewhat surprisingly to people who don't follow this history, Jackson, a Scots-Irish like uplander, like detested John C. Calhoun and famously engineered John C. Calhoun's great embarrassment in the Senate with Webster's reply to Hayne. And Jackson was a unionist, and all of this stuff where like Jackson was the inheritor of a project under which Americans were a laboring, working, landed people who genocided everyone in their way because there was only the white people, and you had to make sure that there were a lot of people get killed so that you can have all the stuff for the other people. But like that tradition of like laboring and work above other things is a tribal legacy of a certain strand of Americana that exists with us today. And like you see this in Proudly Scots-Irish J.D. Vance, where it's like he's like all about that kind of Jim Webb legacy of like what that meant to be of those people and what those people were about. And like obviously I share that heritage and some of that ideology. I wouldn't deny it. And so my point is being like, in a way, I think we have seen over the course of the last few years, like a playing out in discussions of like AI and stuff, actually a legacy of that tribal warfare. And people who come out of the sort of Jacksonian ideology are very much people who are skeptical of the like, Northeastern intellectual elite and the Southern planter elite, to two sort of like disconnected, weird, intellectualized cultures that are not actually that core to like the American Ohio Valley spreading out to the frontier kind of like core people that give us like country music and like just the stuff of middle America. Those are cultures that are actually like alien to that. And there's a reason why people like just kind of hate it. For reasons they don't understand, because it's like outside of the core Americana tradition that actually a lot of non-white people have been assimilated to, especially like I live in Southern California. Like Jacksonian America in Southern California lives on through Mexican people and Armenians, essentially.
You know what
And
Henry Adams
I
said?
think that is
I've been
good.
running this in my head that he says somewhere that a lot of the great acts of centralization in American history paradoxically have been done by Jeffersonians. And that this is one of
Yeah,
the great
that's
ironies
true.
or tragedies of American history, is that the Jeffersonians have repeatedly, despite avowing uh, what they avow, have actually enacted centralizing projects. So, like Front Porch Republic published that fascinating book about how land ownership, like that Jefferson's ideas about like surveying and land ownership and so on, have resulted in all kinds of centralization, um, unintentionally. Or
This has been the
the Fugitive
dance
Slave
since
Act would be
forever.
another classic example of, like the states' rights decentralizers enacting, like a um, something that would make Stalin blush. It would
Yeah,
make
although
Stalin.
that's not that. That's outside of the
Okay, but sure. But
Jeffersonian
anyway, but the
thing. But
decentralizers in supposed decentralizers in American history, ironically, have um, repeatedly enacted centralizing.
this is my point with the New Deal. Like this, to guarantee liberty, you needed, I mean, to start, you needed a large state project of federal military force to subdue the Sioux and the Blackfeet. Like that, so that you like this is how this has worked. Like when you, if you want to guarantee like the chance of a farmer to be able to live a Jeffersonian lifestyle in America today, what are you going to do? You're going to develop regulatory structures that break, finally, maybe someday, the farm monopolies. Like you have to use centralizing structures such that you can devolve power down. That's like how this has always worked. And like that was the Erie Canal is a massive state project backed by Jackson. This is what Jackson and Calhoun got into it over. Calhoun didn't want to pay for the Erie Canal, and Webster's whole thing was like, well, liberty and union forever because this is going to open up the Great Lakes to blah blah blah. I don't know
Hoffman
the
has
whole
a
story
lot of
about it.
great writing about
But
upstate New York before the Erie Canal, by the way, which I recommend. He's like one of the chroniclers of that history. But let's not argue about the New Deal anymore, just because these are well
well, I'm not arguing about it.
traveled
I'm just saying like this
roads.
is
But
my
I'm
point is
curious
that
about
like
what you all think of my my idea
I'll
of
say
catabolic
something here.
collapse, but being intellectual catabolic collapse.
So I think, okay, I first of all, I think it sounds plausible. It's a plausible theory. It sounds like it's got high explanatory power for me, especially when I think about something like the discipline of sociology. Even like 10 years ago, when I'm getting trained, there's like a certain methodological approach that one takes that we've developed over the course of a century about how to understand the social world. You triangulate, you use different methodologies. Sometimes you do qualitative interviews, sometimes you do surveys. The surveys have to be done well. All of that is like going out the window. People are doing horrible methodology to the point that they're going to even forget what the correct methodology ever was, and then they're not going to be able to maintain the structure of the discipline, and it'll just it sounds like it'll collapse on its own. I think that what's happening here in this conversation is a theory of change question, which is, do we want to seek out, or is it possible in this historical material period to have centralized like change, have some sort of power happen as a result of like a visionary coming in TR style and doing some sort of project? Or is it like what Don's explaining, and this is kind of the contention of this podcast from the beginning, a lot of us think this, is it just collapsing, and are we just noticing catabolic collapse, not only like material catabolic collapse, but intellectual catabolic collapse, and things will necessarily emerge out of that collapse? Or is there hope for both, where on the one hand you've got catabolic collapse happening and people are seeing it in advance and they're trying to do something, some sort of machinations, but on the other side, like having a subsidiarity thought of like, if I could get somebody in the White House who will do a cool new bison nationalism thing, like, cool, great, why not? We know that has worked in the past. If we can get that, great. If we can't get it, then we have to have plan B of like, when, I don't know, we can't get fertilizer anymore, and oil's too expensive to run these giant combines, then things just
The
decentralize on
things
their
that
own,
I'm
kind of
interested
thing.
in and do and participate in, which are very small beans and don't speak to, like, I'm not a farmer, rancher, or logger. I had a really interesting combination with a tree farmer in my county the other week, and this is just an aside, but he is growing. Um, uh, he mostly like Western red cedar because that's what people grow here. But he's also doing uh, what are the huge trees? There are a lot of them in California. Um, he's growing sequoias too, but he
sequoias.
said there is
Sequoia?
no mill. Let's
Yeah.
say he got his sequoias huge. There is no mill anywhere that he knows of that could mill those trees. That
Well, my mobile milling startup is on its way, Don. I've
See, this is
I've been
exactly what
on
we
this
do
I
on
know,
for
this
I knew
podcast
you would.
right
years.
now. We solve it.
I
I've
know.
proposed this to
I
you
know.
on the
That's why
first
I
time I
brought it
came
up
on
because I
here.
knew you would appreciate it. So anyway, it was interesting how lots of stuff is connected, right? That even if tree farmers want to do cool experiments, if there's no milling capacity to turn those experiments into lumber, then they can't. If they can't sell their wood, then they can do all kinds of cool forestry. But if the entire milling economy is about milling trees that are exactly the same size because they grow on 40-year cycles at the like big um uh like clear cut grow new trees in the same cycle, and so all the milling is computerized and done for growing for milling trees that are exact same size, then people doing other stuff are out of luck. But that's an aside. Um, uh, Related to the catabolic collapse, I lead a seminar on Monday evenings here, where I choose the readings, and it's been interesting to read new things and also to reread things. So I've been rereading Nietzsche's Use and Abuse of History. Have you either of you read that book? I think it's a really
Mm-mm.
it's a short book, maybe 60 pages long. I think it's fantastic. Uh, but it's what it's brought to mind to me is how many things I interact with feel really stuck in the 20th century. Um, I'm adjacent to the classical education movement. That feels really stuck in the 20th century to me. You hear people talking about like, oh, objective truth, and we had to stop moral relativism. Well, that's all 20. That was like what C.S. Lewis was dealing with 100 years ago, or what Leo Strauss was dealing with in the
Yeah.
40s and the 50s, when actually like, moral relativism was a thing that university professors would very earnestly explicate, but who defends it anyway? So I've just been struck by how many things, and I don't know if this speaks, it's the environmentalism thing too, feel stuck in the 20th century, feel like going over 20th century things, and that like I just read with my high school students T.S. Eliot's essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, which I think pairs really nicely with the Nietzsche book. But one of the things that Eliot talks about is that if you really understand the Western tradition, it's not static, that like new works are in conversation with previous ones, but they're doing, they're moving forward, they're doing new things. And so um yeah, I've just been feeling frustrated by how many things feel stuck in the 20th century. And the 20th century, such a dreadful and evil century, that I'm really tired of feeling stuck in it and want to. Techno optimism also feels stuck in the 20th century. Actually, it's like the 1990s Wired magazine
Yeah, I
over
mean,
and over
maybe
and over again.
maybe James wants to talk about his concept of abundance conservatives and abundance libs being like part of the same tribe, and that we're like, I don't know if this is a good time to talk about that
Well,
because
it sort of connects. I mean, like I just read the Abundance
Why?
book,
Why would you? Why? Why
just to
would you?
tie all of
Why
this.
would you?
I'm
he's gotta know,
curious.
you have to
I'm
know what
curious. Yeah,
people,
I want to know what's going on.
it's a bit part of the
It was good
zeitgeist.
because Ezra's a good writer. And so he's very historically literate. Like, and the book does an amazing job of not really offering any prescriptions, so it's actually like hard to criticize.
Mm,
And so, but what that book is, I mean, to your point, Don, is that book is an elaborate argument for a continuation of the 20th century. It's an
yeah.
elaborate argument for the continuation of 20th century liberalism, and saying basically like, look, like let's update 20th century liberalism enough that we can keep doing stuff so that people are happy with it, so that we can keep this whole thing going, right?
Yeah.
And Banjo, will you just chill? Sorry, my dog. And like to your point, Ashley, about like, oh, is there going to be a savior to emerge from the wings, or is it just going to keep degrading forever and ever? Like, I think that question, the one presupposes the other. It doesn't guarantee it, but it presupposes it. So, like, you don't have someone emerge unless the other stuff is going wrong, and that's just kind of how this stuff works. And the I think the problem with like the abundance liberal and the abundance conservative being very much, I mean, like they literally go to the same things, like they host the
There,
same events and things.
yeah.
And like the idea is like get back to growth, get back to like just pushing forward and like our stuckness, this feeling of like this superstructure being like just not very good, as Don describes it, which I think is a very powerful feeling. It's the most powerful feeling in the world in a way. It's like that's what causes the Soviet Union to collapse. It's not like, oh, the coal plants don't work in this one way that makes me mad. It's like I'm just sick of this whole thing. Like I just don't care. And I think we are verging on that. Um, and the presupposition of abundance is like, well, if we just tinkered at the margins, then like we can keep the whole thing going for a while and that'll be awesome.
We just need more bureaucracy, more technocrats. We just need to do it a little better, or like
Or
real
maybe it's like
technocracy's not
less
been tried.
And like
regulation,
what
more
I'm
business. I mean, you could have different, you know.
And so I was cracking up because I'm writing about this book in the context of like what's going on in California right now. And like if you just look at how California functions, like with the regulatory superstructure, that like they make basically the centerpiece of the whole book is like California makes it hard to build houses, which is just mathematically a ludicrous proposition. Like California has enough houses to house its people. Like they don't talk at all about the financial superstructure that caused lots of boomers to own 3 houses, which is like actually the problem, but they don't want to do. Regardless, how California actually functions is that it is effectively like it's like an iceberg system where there's a regulatory system that like people like kind of follow mostly a little bit like above a certain class gradient and like when they're not doing certain things and then the rest of it is just completely gray market black market or illegal because it's just too complicated to follow the rules. So like there's places where like virtually all of the housing is existing non-conforming, so the code just is it's just like, can I bribe the guy in the right way so that
Yeah.
I can have the house? And then that works. But like all of the housing is illegal functionally. Population wise, like it's like instead of fixing whatever the system, I'm not getting into immigration, but instead of fixing the system, you have a labor market where like it's completely dependent on people who get paid sub minimum wage, despite the fact that you have the greatest labor protections in North America, whatever. And then you give people driver's licenses, but you can't fix the problem of like, is that person documented? Which they functionally are because they have a driver's license, definitionally. So what are we talking about? Um, Guns, like there's just counties where like you can just have illegal guns because they're like, well, this is all stupid. And then like you cross a county line and you're in prison for 10 years for the same thing. Um,
So what is the post 20th century vision here that
my
gets
point
us out
with
of this
that is
rut?
that I think you're gonna have to sweep that away like a mandala. Like I think that just is not gonna work. Like you're not gonna like tinker at the margins with that and get back to somewhere. And I just think a lot of people don't really know that stuff because especially above a certain class gradient, you just follow the rules and you have the money to get it existing non-conforming, so you're fine. But like a lot of people just live in trailers in the woods now. Like Don and I talked about this. Like you're sort of just out of the legal market and out of the legal system entirely, especially in like rural areas and especially in like South LA, which is functionally paramilitarized and run by the Mexican mafia. Again, it's not a judgment. It's just you almost
Parts of
need
South
But it's like
you
Chicago.
almost
a
need
lot
that
of, like you were
because the
saying, a
cops
lot of
can't do
the
it.
homeless encampments are run or owned by Armenian gangs.
Yeah, the Armenian gangs. And like when people were robbing the trains, like who stopped that? Not the Los Angeles Police Department, you know.
Uh,
Um,
uh,
and so
uh, if I could toss in a few, um, I don't know, very prescriptive ideas for moving. Um, so one, I think we had to operate um, as if the collapse has already happened. I think I think we had to operate as if collapse has already happened. So then that frees us from worrying about what will the collapse be? When is it going to collapse? Already happened. It already happened. Or so some in some cases, on like a collapse of governance in the way that James just described, that exists in some places. But I think in terms of like spiritual, intellectual collapse, it already happened. We don't have to worry about it happening. Don't have to like stay up at night wondering about any of that because it already happened. Okay, fine. It happened. It happens sometimes. Now it already happened to us. Um, I think if and maybe this gets back to our earlier disagreement. I think that if you're doing something cool, that cool things die when you turn away from the thing right in front of you towards whatever's happening nationally. And you can see this over and over again with organizations when they're doing something really cool locally and then they try to um, uh, get big or scale or
Yeah,
like
scale it
turn it into
out.
a national model, and then
Yeah.
like the person suddenly is not the head of it, is like doing speaking gigs at conferences and is not like there day to day, and you start getting grants. And okay, so I think if you turn away from your local thing towards the national thing, and doesn't, honestly, it doesn't matter what your ideology is. There's a sort of there's national stuff that'll pull you in any kinds of directions, but I think things die when you turn away from the thing right in front of you. And that the nice thing about things that have already collapsed, that the field is really open, and you can just do stuff.
Uh,
Um, and it is true that like government bureaucracy, like a bureaucrat could get a bee in her bonnet about whatever you're doing and like make your life hell, but that probably won't happen. And that could happen to you regardless of what you're doing, just because you like filled out a form wrong, or just you were unlucky or whatever. And so I don't think you should worry about it. You can, and so, um, and that, the other thing is that since the collapse has already happened, I think if you do things that are real, then it becomes a kind of superpower that you instantly become elevated above everything else. Uh, that it doesn't take much agency and intentionality to do something that the quality is like significantly higher than everything else happening. Like I took a group of high
Okay,
school
I have a counter.
freshmen, and by the end of the year, I had them reciting the Iliad in Greek from memory. These were not like the greatest
uh,
students in the world, but they were curious, interesting kids. Now, maybe and you're like, why in the world would anyone recite the Iliad in Greek from memory? That's stupid. I don't think it's stupid. I think it's awesome. Maybe you think it's stupid, and that's fine. But there's no reason that you can do that kind of stuff, and you can just do it. And there are people who will pay you to do it. So
I of course I love most of I mean I love all of that in orientation. One wrinkle we've been discussing or I've been thinking a lot lately. There's this Rusty Reno book called The Return of Strong Gods, and then N.S. Lyons wrote a piece about it, and then I had a whole Doomer Optimism episode just with Jason and Chris Smage about okay, so the hypothesis of it is, you know, the weak gods are like these technocrats, bureaucrats that like lord it over the 20th century, and then we're in a period now where we're turning to strong gods, like local big man on campus type, you know, maybe nationalism, maybe localism, you know, these kinds of like different orientations towards leadership. The only thing that I would like to raise while I have you both here is like one thing we asked in that episode, like which strong gods and what does that look like? Like there are certain people affiliated with our podcast even who have, you know, just done cool things, and I don't love I mean they're allowed to do whatever they want and it can attract whoever they want, but like I don't love some of the things. Sometimes things are go a little towards the direction of a cult. And you don't want like you don't really want I mean I don't want the bureaucrats either, but then people take advantage of this like
James, I
disorganized
want you
period
to. I'm curious to what
for
both of you say to that. And I'm sorry, Ashley. I've just I've been thinking about this stuff,
no, it's
and
okay. That's all.
um, I, I never bother my wife about it. But I
well,
just want to say something, and then I'll shut up and let you two go. Um, which is that I want human prejudice, and I want prejudice, and I want failure, and I want um, uh, mistakes, and I want projects that get out of hand. I want all of that at a human scale. I think all of that is the stuff of life, and
Yeah,
that will happen, and that's fine. And I think all of that is
right.
preferable to sanitized, dead, decaying,
That's fair.
decadent bureaucracy. And that, like, I'm like not gonna join a cult. like obviously, like if anyone out there is looking for spiritual direction, I encourage you to go to your nearest Orthodox Christian parish and walk in there on a Sunday morning liturgy and listen and pray and uh, just do normal Christian stuff. Obvious, I think you two might have different answers to that question, but that would be my. It's just like just being like don't you don't have to do anything weird or reinvent the wheel there. But I think people doing
But go hold
making
on. So I have a
mistakes and being strange and having prejudices, all of that is good, and it's far preferable to a sanitized, um, uh, non-judgmental, whatever, uh, you know, thing.
so okay. So you actually anticipated what I was gonna say. Which sort of follow me here for a second, but some of people in our circle just went to Boulder and had some talks on tech and the future and blah blah blah. And one thing that Jeff Schallenberger said in a question on a panel I was on was he asked, and it kind of stopped me short for a second because he was like, "Well, in so much as there's a re-spiritualization of America, what do you think it means that um a certain kind of largely elite, largely white dude is going back to church, but going to Catholic church and Orthodox church?" And I took his meaning, which
That is
was
not
sort
the
of
profile
like,
of people who are walking into Orthodox churches, by the way. Like the reality on the ground is much weirder.
well, I'm just saying, okay,
Much
sure, but
weirder
just
everywhere.
at an elite level in the United States of America, that is
A
happening.
little bit, yeah.
Um, and for sure it's happening. What are you talking? I mean, like,
Just go ahead, Jay. We'll take it as the presupposition.
and the point that he was making that was a little obscure, but I think is actually a profound one, is that like the conservative impulse to kind of bring back that Jacksonian America, that tradition of like whatever this thing was that we sort of like in the chaos and the catabolic collapse and everything else, like people are freaking out and realizing like it's going away. And like it poses this weird question because actually, if that re-spiritualization is going to those places, the America that we understood, that conservatives understand, that is like the formation Anglo-Saxon thing that was this country, is probably never coming back. Because that's a very profound shift from what it was, even if you are becoming conservative or spiritual in a different way.
It's gone. It's been gone
And
a long time. There's
my, well, I think that what we have to face, and that is a big issue for everyone in these conversations, is like, to what lengths are the people around who like might share the view that you have, Don, like willing to go to try to like grasp back onto a thing that like
I think
maybe is
that's
just
what
gone.
I'm not
And like,
arguing referring to Jacksonian.
I'm not saying that's what you're saying. Hold on, I'm just making a point here, which is that like, because like getting weird and like doing hard things and like making hard choices that like liberalism sort of presupposed you didn't have to make, and like having in-group feeling, which others might call prejudice, like when that is a grasping dying empire attempt to like deport 10 million people in the space of 4 years, like it's a probably not going to work, and B, like going to turn everything you just said into things that people who do not necessarily disagree with you find very abhorrent. And I think I'm coming around to the idea that like we need to have a conversation nationally about whether that America that persisted for a very long time, longer than the existence of the Republic, is still alive or is ever coming back. Because if it's like a dying project to restore a thing that is lost, I think it's going to be much uglier than any of the kind of like nice things that you're like, oh, yeah, this is better than like the sanitized world. I agree with that in principle. I think what we are seeing right now is the taking shape of an attempt to desanitize everything and make everything more real again in a way that might be very ugly. And I think all of that really does derive from a kind of misplaced, I don't want to say misplaced, an unformed question about what it is that people are trying to restore slash save slash build anew. And those things are often working in great contravention to each other. And there are often people who seem to be allies who actually want to do different things. Some people want to build new things, some people want to restore, some people want to preserve. And that coalition of people that is very vague, the tone for that is being set by some people who I think very much are on the restore wing of things. And whose project probably honestly maybe like is not set up to succeed. And so just with your point, like I completely agree. I think that's the nature of the localism thing. That's why it's so important. But it's coalitionally, I think part of why people are so skeptical of the localism thing is that it has this valence of like, for localism to work, you have to deport 10 million people. And like, that's just functionally not going to happen. Donald J. Trump is not going to do that. Even if you
You keep
wanted
bringing
that to
up
happen, it's
national
not going to work.
politics, and
So like,
I'm not interested. I'm not.
but I'm saying if
I'm
you
not.
live in a nation, you live
I'm
in a
not part
nation,
of a
man. Like that's the
political
point. Is like you
coalition. I
can't
don't
really get
vote.
away from it.
So
But you're
I'm gonna
downstream of
put on.
all of this.
Uh,
Like you're not. You think you're separate
I'm gonna put
from
on
it?
my
It's
Orthodox hat
crazy.
for a second. Um,
But even
wait,
that is part of a national
wait.
movement. How did you in Bellingham, Washington, come to be
Because of the Holy
Orthodox?
Spirit. So, um, the
Because it's the
because it,
correct and right, true
The
thing,
Holy
James,
Spirit works
because
through
it's
obviously.
the
one holy
voice of
Catholic and
men. Like this
Apostolic
is how
Church.
this
So,
works.
there is a deep history of Orthodoxy in America, and it is in Native Alaskans. That is the deep history of Orthodoxy in America, and it is in
Yeah.
the toughest group of Americans, I think it's fair to say, which is Native Alaskans. Like Saint Olga of Alaska, who was just canonized recently, was a midwife in a tiny town in Alaska, uh, like the kind of town you have to take float planes to, or you know. Um, so Russian missionaries like Saint Innocent and Saint Herman came to Alaska centuries ago, fell in love with the native peoples there, found their spirituality to be shockingly similar to Orthodox Christianity, learned their language, translated the hymns and prayers and liturgy into Aleut and other languages, helped defend the native peoples against Russian trappers and merchants who were abusing them, and have created a really cool um, uh, like American spiritual tradition, which still lives on in Alaska, and is now, I think, really the wellspring for the resurgence or the spreading, not the resurgence because it was never there in the first place, but the flowering and spreading of Orthodoxy in America now. America is a really spiritually immature place. Um, and and we are good Americans. We want to like do things our own way and so on. But I think we have a lot to learn from people who've been doing this a lot longer. And so I think Orthodoxy in America is still very small and still very immature, and it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of learning from Native Alaskans who've been doing it a lot longer than uh, like Orthodox in the contiguous United States, and also from Greeks and Serbians and Russians, um, immigrants and people from the old country that obviously have much longer traditions than us. So I don't know. I guess I like the things that you're worried
Well,
about, James, that you're describing seem totally foreign to my experience day to day. Like the people who wander into my parish are strange and wonderful and fascinating. Like we I don't know, I guess we don't really have elite people in my corner of Northwest Washington, I think in the way that you're saying, but like we get, guys who work on the Naval Air Base, or like a pharmacy tech who was going to a local synagogue but just drove by our church all the time, like on her way to work at Rite Aid, or guys who are building houses in the construction development next
Sure.
door who were curious. Like that is the, or like random homeless people. That is closer to the sort of person who wanders in to.
But I'm not saying anything bad about orthodoxy. I'm saying that like what we are experiencing is a change in what it meant to be this kind of like, in large part, like conservative American, and a backlash amongst conservative Americans trying to restore that. My question is like whether or not I think my point is that I think we need to have a national conversation. We live within a nation about whether or not that project is actually feasible. Because like I don't even really know if they think it is, but there is a power structure in the United States of America at this time, and people who share that project are atop that power structure
Conservative
at this
liberal
time.
just seems so dumb to
And
me.
so
That it just seems so. And I would say that
But it's like saying like, oh, nations are dumb. Like Homer wasn't Greek. Like he was just
Wait,
man of
okay.
the world. Like no, if you someone self-identifies as conservative, then that it is a meaningful category.
Wait, let
Like
me just say something. It's actually interesting because the last conversation I had about like this return of strong gods with Jason and Chris, who are both like left leaning. Well, obviously, also, but Jason has just converted to Christianity. He's gone pretty full throated with it. Was that we just like there is no way into this future where we're probably facing catabolic collapse without some sort of moral framework, and that could be a Christian moral framework and a lot of work done on the individual level to be like a moral person and not to do cults that are immoral or whatever in this period of strong gods, but also like a civic morality. Like you were saying, going back to what you said at the beginning, James, like these projects that were built around like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like we have these moral frameworks already. It's
and my
just a matter of like following them and having some adherence to them and then bringing them forward out of this, I don't know,
and my point is
morass.
that I think the moral framework such that like a lot of people who are white people who grew up in middle America like sort of grew up with um may not actually survive whatever this is going to be. And that, like, Don, this is why I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying, like, I think you are unique in regards of saying, like, well, I'm just building my own moral framework in my own corner of the world. That's great. That's not a luxury that like a lot of people have, and a lot of people don't have the mindset you have. Like they're not capable of insulating themselves from the world in the way that you are. I'm certainly not. We might be at different extremes in that regard, but somewhere in the middle is where normal people fall. And my point is just that, like, absent a conversation about whether or not that moral framework is going to be developed in a way that I believe goes broader than just build your own thing in your town, um, we are liable to see a lot of really ugly things, if only because there's a ton of very, very rich and powerful boomers who hold all of the assets in this country who are really wedded to a 20th century liberalism that doesn't really work. And there's a ton of like angry young men in blue blazers who are really wedded to a thing from 1837 that probably doesn't work. And like between the two, we are headed towards a cliff, in my opinion.
so. I
That's all I'm
just
saying.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm
want to
agreeing
be
with you
clear that
basically.
I'm
Yeah.
not arguing for creating my own moral framework. That sounds very prideful, and I'm I think I'm hopefully I think we should be creating our own stuff for our lives, though. I guess what I'm, and I think that like I don't know, fixing the nation is above my pay grade. I don't know. I have no idea what that would mean or how it would work at all. But I think in order, if you want to do something cool, um, whether it's so on just the in the stuff of your personal life, which basically means creating a family and developing a family culture and friendships and starting a business or a farm or anything like that, opening a school, building stuff where you are that you have to turn away from the national conversation. You have to turn away from the nonprofit industry. You have to turn away from uh, journalism, other than the writings of James Pogue. You can subscribe to. Wait, are you still writing for Harper's?
No, I'm writing mostly full time
Okay,
for
well,
VF in the New York Times now.
James,
I
you have to
won't go
renounce
so far as
journalism
to
on
say
this
you should
podcast
read
right
the New
now.
York Times,
I'm
but you
so
can
sick
read
of it.
James Pogue's articles. Those are okay. But I think
Yeah. No, Don, you don't know my new thing is I'm going to run for
did
Senate.
you see that PG Sittenfeld was
This is so it's so
And I want you to come back.
antithetical
I
to
want you to
to
come
bring it
back to
back to
Cincinnati and vote
Ohio?
for me.
Did you
Wait,
see
can
that
I just
PG
say
Sittenfeld was pardoned? Pete Rose,
I did.
Pete
Guys, so for
Rose,
people who
and
don't know,
PG
this is
Sittenfeld.
no, we're not turning this into an Ohio
we have to do
podcast.
we have to turn Pete because it's a
No.
whole debate right now. I'm arguing with my friend. So this guy, he his family lived across the street from my grandmother. He became vice mayor of Cincinnati. He's my and Don's age. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He was trying to be like Pete Buttigieg, Obama, kind of like
Oh, okay.
I
rocket
knew
So
him.
he's
ship to
self-groomed,
yeah,
I
and
knew
kind
him.
he
of.
got busted in a Fed corruption scandal involving a Bengals player, like a off-duty Bengals player, went to prison. But all the conservatives liked him because they were like in this thing of like the feds get after the good guys. And so there's a scandal now about whether PG got pardoned because like Trump just it came across his desk and he was like, yeah, it seems wrong. Or if he asked for it, because now he's like apologizing for being pardoned, but he just left prison. Um, and my friend who's friends with him is like showing me the screenshots. He's like, man, like, why did you ask Trump? And I was like, just let him out. Come on.
I was
Free
gonna write him.
PG. He was
I
innocent.
missed my shot because I was
It's
gonna write him a
God.
letter and be like, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, dude, but it's kind of
In
like, how did
prison.
you end up in prison?"
Wait,
I
so
have
you
his
guys are
number. I
both
have
you
his
guys are
number.
both
Yeah.
pro PG just because you know him? Or do you
And he was
actually
set up. It
Well,
was
yeah,
one of those like
he
Oh,
went
he
to
was
take
set
money
up.
from a
yeah, it was
developer, and that developer turned out to be an FBI agent. I don't know.
Okay.
but
Okay.
it wasn't even like they concoct these things.
I
It's
mean,
such
Pete Rose
entrapment. It's
needs to be in the Hall of
ridiculous.
Fame.
Okay.
He was a scumbag and a criminal, but he was our
Isn't
scumbag
he
and
gonna be there?
criminal. And so,
Yeah. Guys, my dog, sorry, this devolved. My dog is, he's gonna lose his mind. I gotta
Wait, I have one final comment and then we'll just close it up. So just to your point, Donald, there's this group in San Francisco, the Zizians. They're like just doing things and it's a death cult. I mean, and it's at the scale you're talking about. It's
okay,
just, you
sure.
have to have a moral framework. It can't just be like it, whatever, just doing things. And I would say that that's also true. This is like the whole idea of subsidiarity. On the scale of the nation, if something is beautiful and good and true, like bison nationalism, I'm behind it. I'm going to be behind it because it's beautiful and correct and true and right and it's moral. So I just think like the moral framework's really the question here.
And
Not the scale necessarily.
well, yeah, I'm just, and because if you take it upon yourself to build your own thing, then you are, I'm not saying it's prideful, I think it's good, but
I think it's
you
good.
are taking it upon yourself to decide that the morality of the people around you is a different one than you would like to. So you are taking upon a way to building a thing that is your
You
own.
have a certain
You're not,
vision of
yeah.
something beautiful and good. I mean, you think it's beautiful to recite in Greek, and so that's good.
And
And
like
you've demonstrated
now,
that.
okay, so I've gone from being a New Deal lib to being like an American return conservative nationalist. But like everything that gave you the power to do all of the stuff you're doing right now is downstream of being a part of the American nation, is coming out of this culture, coming out of this thing. And like in so much as that thing is dying, like then you are going to have to be a part of another thing or your life is going to be meaningless. Like, you know, nothing, all of the framework that gave you the Jeffersonian background to go and start your own school and be a hedge teacher and, you know, like that, all of that comes out of a tradition that is very long
That's
standing
absolutely
for
true.
better, for
What I'm
worse.
saying is that if we want to find the new thing, and we'll only find it by trying stuff and experimenting, making mistakes.
Experimenting. I
In
agree.
order to do that, I think you have to turn away from all that other stuff. And that paradoxically, perhaps, people turning away from all that other stuff will flower into something bigger. But I don't even know. That's like several orders past where I'm capable of understanding. I think it's
That might be
and
true.
this is going to sound insulting, but maybe you're just stronger than I am. I think that it's at least for me, psychically necessary to tune out all of that stuff because I think it's madness inducing. So you may have been able to like harden yourself in some way to be able to do the work you do without going mad. I don't know. Uh,
Actually, such.
but I think that it's madness inducing,
No,
and then
I'm incredibly
on a very
permeable. So
practical level,
it
on a
washes
very
through
very
me.
practical level, I know like a friend of mine was involved in a community college in his town that was doing like a great books thing at community college teaching Plato to plumbers. And the guy who started his program tried to spread it to other community colleges all over the country. So he would go and speak at academic conferences to community college people and stop being involved in the thing that he started. And now it's done. It's done. It's gone. It fell apart. And that happens over and over
Yeah.
and over
No.
again. If you want your thing to live, you have to be there in it, doing it. As soon as you become public speaker, grant writer, on the staff of whatever, of whatever foundation, it's over.
All right, James, we're wedded to Dio campout from now into eternity. We can never not go.
Yeah.
We have to be the ones who do it. Final words, anything, James?
I don't know. I can't tell if I'm black pilled or not. I think I am. I don't think there's any. I, I think in this conversation I gave up on America, and Don is right. But like we're just going to be a fragmented group of warring bands for a while, and then something will emerge from it. But
Which is fine. You can just experiment. It can be an experimental period.
I mean, this is my question for listeners is it like what? So okay, either we have failing catabolic collapse liberalism until something else happens and we just try to hold that together, or we have warring bands of orthodox bearded men, or like James David Vance becomes like Red Caesar. Is there like an option
Life.
B
I mean,
here
all
that
of
I'm
this
not
stuff
seeing?
sounds like an interesting
But that's what I'm
sci-fi.
saying. But you just live your life like it
I mean,
allows.
all of the
My point
above
is
is the
just live your
option
life
D.
allows option A, B, or C to take
Yeah,
form.
if any of that
My
stuff
goal
happens,
in
it's not going to be
looking
because of
outside of my
you.
life.
You have I have no idea about any of that stuff. Like,
Excuse me.
Do not know.
Excuse me.
This is going to be James
Like,
origin story
yeah,
podcast.
you can say anything you want to me, but you cannot say that I'm not a world historical actor, sir.
My God, we have it on tape here, folks. All right, we'll let you guys go. This was a great conversation. We solved some things.
the
We made
Ohio
some
River
things more
Valley
complex. I think we're good.
is the past and the future. The Ohio River
That is true.
Valley is
No, Great
is
Lake supremacy.
You are describing the
Chicago.
platform of my Senate campaign. It's Ohio River Valley democracy.
ruled
We're gonna
America
rebuild it.
from between the end of the Civil War and the assassination of McKinley. That was the age of Ohio. Say what we will about that period.
No, great, bigger than that, and then I'll leave you. Because Banjo's gonna have kidney disease. But no, what we need to do is we need to rebuild the concept of Greater Ohio. It's not anything
Yes.
north of Columbus doesn't count, but it's the Greater Ohio Basin, and we need to like
I
build
don't know how to tie the Pacific
that
Northwest
vision
into
of like
that.
what it is, and that ruled
I
America
don't know how to
for
tie the Pacific
what's
Northwest
that?
into that because Whatcom, Skagit, and Island County, Washington are going to become a breakaway maritime agricultural logging republic,
I mean,
and
there
it's going to
should be
be beautiful.
the option
But
D. Yeah,
I want to be part of Greater Ohio.
option D
I wanna
is
be part of
is
Greater
these
Ohio.
beautiful is the beautiful city states, the city states that have regional identities, and that's going to be option D, James.
Renaissance
That's what we're going
Italy
to work
and
for on Dio.
I know. Wait, so are those all just ruled by? They're like principalities ruled by
Yeah,
Chinese AI.
no, not
lords?
no.
This
Don't
is
make
the
it like
worst
that.
French goodbye
it's
we've
great.
ever had. All right, I
Don't
gotta
worry
go.
about it.
Okay,
Okay, bye.
bye.